Good evening and welcome. I'm Swanee Hunt, the director of the Women in Public Policy program, and one of our initiatives within that program is called Women Waging Peace. I was asked yesterday by a reporter from the Boston Globe why on earth the Women in Public Policy program would be sponsoring a visit by Paul Kagame. And it dawned on me that that's not really self-evident, so maybe I should say a word by way of introduction. In June, I was in Rwanda. And how many of you have been to Rwanda? Just a few. More of you have seen the horrific pictures from the genocide. Some of you saw the other day here at the Kennedy School a pre-screening of 100 Days by Nick Hughes, the film coming out. When we think of Rwanda in this country, the image for most of us is of horrors. And I was there to not actually see the horrors. I was there to speak to a group of women from all around the region who were finding ways to very actively confront the violent conflict in their societies. And yet, I was face to face with the obvious, the aftermath of the genocide, in memorials that were piles of skulls in a school with hundreds and hundreds of mummified bodies. And I saw the devastation to the infrastructure. I saw and heard the statistics about the economy, which is at a level of subsistence that none of us in this room, I think, can really understand. And coming out of those very fresh impressions, I had the opportunity just before leaving to meet with President Kagame. And we talked about his visions of attracting international aid. And I said, clearly, there is a strong need for outside support. But it's also been inspiring to me to see the internal resources that you have among women there, the women that I had spent the last week with. And we will be bringing 10 women from Rwanda to the Kennedy School for 2 weeks in November, this coming fall. Getting to know the women in Rwanda has been life-changing for me. And I'd like to just mention a few of them to you by way of introduction. We all think of women with micro-enterprise, and wherever I went in Rwanda, I saw women doing extraordinary work. There was one group near Butare that called themselves Let Us Console Each Other. And these were widows from the genocide who had teamed up with the wives of some of the perpetrators who were now in prison, and they had formed a granary, storage project. And for them, what was important was that they all were hurting, and they all needed support from each other. And that kind of demonstration of unity was profound to me, much more than micro-enterprise projects that we usually think of. I next spent time with an extraordinary woman who is here today. She's sitting here on the front row, Aloysia Nyumba, who had come in to Rwanda in '94, having been raised in exile in refugee camps in Uganda. And she came in at age 29 as the new Minister for Gender and Family and Social Concerns. And her first task was to try to figure out, how do you bury 800,000 corpses? And how do you care for 500,000 orphans? What kind of structure do you put together? How many of you are older than 29? I mean, just, seriously, think about yourselves at that age, confronting those kinds of problems. Aloysia Nyumba now heads the Commission on Unity and Reconciliation. One of her jobs is to prepare the community now for the release of some probably 85,000 prisoners who have been held, I suppose, Aloysia, without trial, really, because there were only 50 trained lawyers at the end of the genocide, since that elite group was targeted. So try to imagine you have all of these people in prison, you don't have the lawyers, what do? You put together something different. You have to. The system doesn't work as you might design it here at the Kennedy School. It can't be done. You can't put together the same legal system. So they went back to gacaca, a tribal custom of bringing people back to the community and letting the wise people in the community decide at that very basic level the future of the people who had been perpetrators in the genocide. Now, the person heading up that system that has been put together after several years and which will go into effect this summer, that is a woman. So in addition to the person heading up the Commission on Unity and Reconciliation, the person heading up the gacaca system that is going to take care of these 85,000 prisoners who will be most likely released is a woman. And then we have with us also today the Minister of Gender and Women's Development, Angelina Muganza. And I'll just say one little vignette. She told me her deputy is married to a man who is in prison for being one of the planners of the genocide. Now, how do you put that together in your mind? I go home and I stare at the walls and I try to understand, what is this reality? How do you put it together? You don't do it with the old formulae. You do it by coming out of the box and saying, wait, we have to look for new answers. It is the women whom President Kagame has put forward to find those new answers that I am very, very proud to be friends with and to be sponsoring in this appearance with President Kagame's delegation. And so on behalf of the Women in Public Policy program, I welcome you all, and now I turn you over to the good hands of Dean Joe Nutt.
Thank you, Swanee, and I want to commend you and the Women Waging Peace program for bringing President Kagame and his women ministers here to talk to us this evening. It's harder to think of a more challenging public policy problem or a more challenging issue for a public leader than that of putting a country back together after a genocide. When I first met President Kagame, it was when I was in the government. It was soon after the genocide. And the thing that struck me first was I expected someone who would be extraordinarily vengeful and would think of revenge. Instead, what struck me most was that the message he had was reconciliation and the need to overcome the deep disasters of the history. Paul Kagame was born in Rwanda, in central Rwanda, in 1957, but he soon had to flee the country as a child because of persecution and killing already at that time. He grew up as a refugee in Uganda, indeed even served as an officer, a senior officer in the Ugandan Army from 1986 to 1990. He holds a diploma in professional management and business studies from the Open University in London. He returned to Rwanda in October 1990 as head of the army to liberate the country from the then government, and after the genocide was appointed Vice President and Minister of Defense, and in April of last year was elected President of the Republic of Rwanda by the Transitional National Assembly. Please join me in welcoming President Kagame to the Kennedy School.
Thank you very much, Joseph Nye. Well, I will briefly make some formal remarks, and I'm grateful that there will be an opportunity for further discussions in a form of Q&A, and I hope that will shed more light on the situation I've been asked to talk about. As I have been requested to talk about the accomplishments and the challenges in reconciliation and reconstruction in Rwanda, distinguished guests, staff, students, and faculty, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to be here at your great institution and share with you some of our experiences in reconciliation and reconstruction efforts in Rwanda since 1994. On behalf of the people and the government of Rwanda, I would like to thank the President of Harvard University, Neil Rudenstine, Dean Joseph Nye, Ambassador Swanee Hunt, and all those who have made it possible for me to share with you Rwanda's experience this evening. It is an honor that my delegation and I cherish. Let me begin by noting that for the past 4 decades, Africa has witnessed conflicts of differing magnitude and intensity, a phenomenon that has spared no region of our continent. The 1994 genocide in Rwanda, however, stands out as one of Africa's, and indeed the world's, darkest chapters in the recent memory. It is not my intention to provide detail on genocide, most of which is familiar to many, but rather my intention is to highlight steps taken in addressing its legacies. Let us recall in passing that both the colonial and post-independence regimes in our country allowed and indeed encouraged Rwandan society to drift into division, into sectarianism, discrimination, and violence that became subsequently a prelude to genocide. Evidence that may be cited include bad governance and weak national institutions that promoted the culture of impunity while disregarding the rule of law, disregard of human rights and fundamental freedoms, division, exclusion, and institutionalized discrimination. There was also state violence inflicted on sections of Rwandan society, periodic massacres, and the exiling of thousands of refugees every decade since 1959. There was also a dependent economy that encouraged consumerism as opposed to entrepreneurship and creation of prosperity. There was economic mismanagement and institutionalized corruption. There was a misguided acquisition and mismanagement of a large external debt. This state of affairs was compounded by the 1994 genocide, whose legacies may be summed up as follows. We lost 1 million Rwandan lives in that genocide. We had hundreds of thousands of orphans, widows, and the rest of the population traumatized. There was near total displacement of the population, with over 3 million refugees in neighboring countries and many more internally displaced. There was collapse of economic and social infrastructure, including businesses, schools, and hospitals. There was dysfunctional public service, whose population was either decimated or in self-exile. There was drastic increase in prison population due to thousands of genocide suspects with no functioning judiciary. It is important that we put in context both pre-genocide and post-genocide legacies in Rwanda. The country was and remains Africa's most densely populated country, with a high population growth of over 3% annually. Up to 70% of this population, 70%, lives below the poverty line and is characterized by exceedingly low skill levels. Over 90% of our population lives in rural areas where they continue to subsist on archaic agriculture. Added to these challenges is the threat of HIV/AIDS that currently affects 1 out of 9 in a population of 8 million people. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in our various efforts to mend our social and economic fabric in the past 6 years, we have accomplished restoration of security and stability in a difficult regional environment, repatriation and resettlement of over 3.5 million refugees, reintegration of over 15,000 officers, men and women, of the former army into our armed forces. Contribution, we created a fund in which the government contributes 5% of our annual revenue to the survivors, so that it helps the survivors of genocide. We have also achieved settlement of the problem of over 300,000 genocide orphans, 80% of whom are now fostered by families as opposed to institutions. There has been release and reintegration of over 500 children suspected of genocide crimes. Likewise, the aged suspects have been released. There has been rehabilitation of the justice sector with the goal of replacing the culture of impunity with the rule of law. Successful and non-divisive grassroots elections in 1999, leading to local elections by this year and the national elections by the end of the transition period. There has been devolution of decision-making to the grassroots to permit local communities' participation. there has been setting up of the Legal and Constitutional Commission that is working on the drafting of a new constitution, which is to provide the framework for national elections, among other things. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in Rwanda's situation, no sustainable political, social, economic development is possible without investment in national reconciliation. The government of national unity, which is based on a power-sharing formula involving 8 political parties, has actively promoted programs that foster unity and reconciliation. These programs include setting up of an all-party national parliament and cabinet, establishment of National Unity and Reconciliation Commission to spearhead national dialogue on reconciliation in the country, resolution and management of property-related conflicts, which was inherited after the genocide, and the promulgation of the genocide law with the related categorization of degrees of responsibility and guilty plea bargaining as a way of easing the problem of the huge number in the prisons. The establishment of the participatory form of justice, locally known as Gacaca, aimed at supplementing the conventional justice system that cannot cope with the pending caseload of genocide suspects. It is our belief that reconciliation must also have a developmental program that should address poverty and ultimately uplift the social and economic standards of Rwandan people. Hence, our attempts at economic reforms, which have sought to create, among other things, a stable macroeconomic environment that is enabling to Rwanda's productivity, investment, and trade. We believe these reforms have also redefined the core functions of the state and the complementary roles performed by the private sector and civil society. Our external partners have been satisfied by our efforts in this direction. Overall, the Rwandan economy has been stabilized and returned to productive capacity of pre-war levels. Ladies and gentlemen, women have traditionally been sidelined in Rwandan political and economic endeavors. Yet, Rwandan women constitute 54% of our population and have suffered disproportionately from genocide and previous conflicts. Over 37% of national households are now headed by women in Rwanda. We fully recognize the critical roles that women must play in our society if we are to advance as a nation. On this basis, we have, for example, enacted laws that promote gender equality and safeguard women's rights to own and inherit property, among other things. Furthermore, women have taken their own initiatives in instituting national organizations with such objectives as promotion of ownership and leadership in political and economic domains. Rwanda has been rebuilding itself for the past 6 years, and the challenges remain enormous. We are determined to continue to lay the foundation upon which new ethics and practices should lead to the emergence of a different country that Rwanda deserves to be. The ethics and practices should reflect the following fundamental features: peace and stability, unity, justice and rule of law, democracy and good governance, improved social and economic standards of all Rwandans. We are convinced that we can continue to make progress. The achievements we have made remain modest. However, we believe that we have a vision and resolve that will permit us to meet the challenges of our country. On this, I wish to thank you very much for listening and look forward to interacting more through the questions that people might intend to ask. Thank you very much.
Please go to the microphones for your questions. Let me ask you, because we have a large crowd, to keep your questions brief and one per customer. So we'll now proceed for the first question. Also, please identify yourself and any relationship you have with Harvard or the community so that President Kagame knows whom he's speaking with.
Thank you, sir. My name is Catherine Wiesner, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. You spoke about Reconstruction. Excuse me. You spoke about Reconstruction and development. Both of these things, I think, will be very difficult in Rwanda as long as such a high percentage of your national resources are required to carry out the military operations in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Rwanda has understandable, I think, security concerns regarding Interahamwe across the border, but the war right now shows little promise of a military solution. My question, therefore, is, with the recent change in leadership in the Congo and even your meetings last week in Washington, D.C., what are the prospects for the implementation of the Lusaka Accords? And if you yourself were a member of the international community, what would you suggest as measures to support Rwanda's withdrawal from the Congo?
Well, thank you. Evidently, involvement in a conflict goes counter to these objectives of development and reconstruction. That's as a matter of fact, that's true. But that's not the only thing that does that. Like in our case, there are few alternatives. Our involvement in the Congo has been in the quest to deal with our security concerns related to the events of 1994, and without addressing those, still development would not take place in any case. So that's how, in the first place, in 1996, we got involved in the war in the Congo. We got involved in the war in the Congo because there were camps along the border, and in these camps there were bases for the former soldiers, the militias who had participated in the genocide, and they continued to cross the border and kill people inside our country and destabilize the whole situation. So again, we could not develop with this situation. We could not reconstruct with this situation. So we had to, that's the basis on which we had to get involved in the Congo. knowing that then today we have a peace process, at least there is a peace agreement that was supposed to help us shift now from fighting the war to addressing these problems that created this conflict in the Congo. And that's why today, in the last few months, that's why we have been putting our focus. Well, the peace process has not worked. It is still difficult in terms of implementation, but we are still working on that. So really, I want to agree with you on one hand that yes, that's a problem, but on the other hand, it is not, the problem we are involved in was not actually to deal with reconstruction and development as such, but to uproot the causes of the conflict that in the long run was indeed going to hinder for a long time reconstruction and development. But we have this peace process, we want it to work. So the prospects. It's true I did meet President Joseph Kabila, the new president in the Congo, and we particularly discussed this problem. My interest was to get a sense from him where he stands on the problem of the region working together to find peace, not only for Congo, but also for the other concerned neighbors, including my country. I was encouraged to understand from him that he's interested in working towards peace. I was I also appreciated the fact that he realized there was a problem we had to sort out. So we look forward to see how practical that can be in terms of the framework that already exists of Lusaka, where we can now sit, including the new president, and we work towards peace. International community, therefore, should support the efforts in the region, bring together, support the countries getting together and addressing this issue of peace by implementing the peace process that was agreed on in Lusaka, which really provides a good framework in which some of the problems in the region can be resolved, including those in my own country.
President Kagame, my name is Zaid Yassin. I'm an undergraduate at Harvard University. My question regards the feeling in Rwanda towards the international community. How would you say the sentiment is in Rwanda among both the general population and in the Rwandan government towards the international community that deserted Rwanda when it was needed the most, towards the United States and its government that lobbied against action in Rwanda when it could have made a difference, and towards the UN peacekeepers that ran away at the very moment when they could have saved lives?
Well, the feeling has for quite some time been that of frustration. I'll give you a bit of history. In 1993, when the war in Rwanda started in 1990, and in 1993, the government and the Rwandese Patriotic Front, ourselves, and other parties in Rwanda sat down and agreed also on a framework through which they can address these problems. Yes, then UN came in, and the UN was supposed to assist the parties, the signatories to this peace agreement, to implement that peace agreement. They brought in forces, military forces, to provide security, to provide, to observe the process, to see that the process was working. First, this presence of the UN force provided ultimately really a false sense of security for the people, for the general population in Rwanda who wanted peace and who thought therefore the UN forces and others were there to help Rwanda implement this peace process and have peace, and that these were guarantors of this peace process to succeed. Of course, as you are aware, when the genocide took place in 1994, in actual fact, there had been information for quite a long time that this genocide was going to take place. And I remember some of the Rwandese who had wanted to leave Rwanda because they suspected something would go wrong because this information was coming, were provided a sense of security by the presence of the UN. So they did not flee, they did not leave the country, they stayed put. And of course, when those who were responsible for the genocide struck, they started killing people, and people thought the UN forces were going to help. In fact, others ran to them, they ran to their bases where they had camps, and the forces would simply run away from them, or would even threaten them if they followed them. So they would leave them where they have found them, and if they attempted to follow them, they would threaten them. And later on, these people would come and they would be killed. So that's one part of the story. The other part was that even when the fighting continued, when the genocide continued, when the killings were going on for quite weeks, perhaps months, the international community, which had a huge presence on the ground, could not define what was happening on the ground. So they spent months trying to define, to give a descriptive word for what was happening. And this delayed action. So others were saying, well, it was genocide. Others were saying, maybe acts of genocide. Others were saying massacres. So they started playing with words for months. And that's how, in 90 days, 1 million people were killed. So you can understand, well, that's another part of the story. The other part is, even when all that had happened, it's as if it did not constitute a lesson to anybody, so that it does not happen anywhere else or repeat itself in Rwanda. By the following actions really did not reflect that anybody had even learned a lesson from this. So there is a general sense of frustration, of even to a level of contempt, really, that under the gaze of the international community, this could happen and continue to happen, and so on and so forth.
On the right balcony.
My name is Masunda Bundu, and I'm a Congolese of origin. I'm concerned about the Congolese people. I have heard a lot about genocide in Rwanda, and I've heard a lot about the lives lost in Rwanda. I laud you for you trying to reconstruct your country. But I would like to ask a question about, there are over now 2 million people dead, most of them children and women in the Congo. That is a genocide going on, a greater genocide that has happened in Rwanda. And most of the time, the reports that come through all kinds of media say that there's very little military casualty. That means that the Rwandan and Ugandan armies helping the rebels in the Congo are inflicting all that pain on the Congolese people. The other thing is that your army or your forces are well inside the Congo. They are maybe 1,000 kilometers inside the Congo, up to Kisangani. They're destroying the infrastructure of the country, meaning that the Congo has to take decades before the rebuilding, as you're trying to do in your country. Since the Congo did not attack you, what are your army doing in the Congo, and why are you killing the people in the Congo? Is it your right to be in there, or is it because you are strong now? Or give us the steps that you are going to take in detail so that we can resolve this problem. We used to be brothers.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate the question very much. Let me, yes, unfortunately, people are dying. I'm not going to be specific about numbers. I don't know the exact numbers, but people truly are dying in Congo, in Rwanda, in the region, in Burundi, and elsewhere. It's a general problem. But let me start by saying that, to be fair, these deaths, the deaths that you are talking about, or a large number of deaths happening in this situation, have been taking place, if you are to be fair, for decades in the Congo, and unfortunately even in other countries on our continent, on our poor continent. Some of the deaths are out of diseases, out of hunger, out of... This has been a common occurrence even in the Congo itself for quite a long time, from Mobutu's days to Kabila's days, and well, actually even before Mobutu. I was told in Congo there was a genocide. If you read the book where they were talking about King Leopold, the genocide of King Leopold in the Congo that consumed, they say, 10 million Congolese. This is an old story that in actual fact we had hoped that the going of Mobutu and the coming of Kabila would solve that. That was the hope. Not only that, it wasn't going to address only the internal problems of Congo. We had thought that this would also help resolve, in a regional context, other problems in the region, in other countries, including Rwanda, if the governments had worked together to address these problems. But then you continued to have a situation where the Interahamwe and ex-FAR were being armed to cross from Congo into Rwanda to kill people. So the aim of Rwandese to move into Congo, to be there even now, has not been so much to fight the Congolese, it is to fight these ex-FAR and Interahamwe and those who support them. Unfortunately, it's not so much the Congolese people who really support them, it's the government of Congo that supports them. And most of these deaths can be counted on the government of Congo, which supports ex-FAR and Interahamwe, and create a situation where such responses have got to take place to ensure that that problem does not cross into our country. So I appreciate that there is that general concern. I appreciate, we are concerned about this, not only in Congo, but also in our country, in the region. And that's why the solution for these problems must be comprehensive. Must be comprehensive, and the framework was really there. The framework, when you read what is in the Lusaka peace process, that was even signed by Kabila, that was signed by his allies, that was signed by all of us, the rebels in the Congo. The framework is there. It might not be adequate, it might not be adequately addressing all the problems, but that was a framework from which you could start moving forward to resolve those problems. So the logic lies in making sure that this peace process works, and then the problems we are talking about, when we're talking about death, we have to think about the causes of those deaths, which might be connected, which might be many and connected, which might clearly be complex, but I appreciate that that can be solved through the peace process, and the Congolese can continue to work together with the Rwandese as in history was the case. I fully appreciate that. And for us, we are saying we are ready to pull out our forces from Congo, but in the framework of Lusaka, there is a provision for addressing the problems that took us in the Congo in the first place. And we're always saying, why don't we implement this? Why don't we address the reasons that also brought us in Congo, our concerns for security? Why don't they get addressed? They should be addressed, and the Congolese can contribute to that. By Congolese, I'm talking about the government. The ordinary Congolese might be really having no problem in this, except the government. So the government in the Congo and other governments in the region can sit together and address everybody's concerns, and that will also ultimately result into the address for that situation in the Congo, which is unfortunate, but which I will also inform you has been there even before the conflict.
Left balcony.
My name is Luis Hernandez. I'm a graduate student at the Divinity School, and I co-edit the Harvard Journal of Hispanic Policy here at the Kennedy School. The spirit of reconciliation requires not only forgiveness and remorse, but also the implicit commitment to learn from the tragic mistakes of the past. I would like to ask, to what extent would you agree with the arguments some have made that the tragic international paralysis during the genocide was about race? I don't know if you heard that. To what extent would you agree?
Please let me get the question again.
Certainly, sir. To what extent would you agree with the argument some make that the tragic international paralysis during the genocide was about race, and more importantly, in terms of international intervention, do you foresee the creation of a multinational peacemaking, not just a peacekeeping force, but a peacemaking force that would be ready to act to prevent the next genocide wherever it may be? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Well, the genocide in Rwanda has a bit of history, and it could have easily been avoided. Well, the history of Rwanda, like the history of any other country in this world, must have had its own imbalances, ups and downs, people who think they are not treated well, the others who think they are maybe who others see as being treated better, and so on and so forth. And this needed to be resolved in ways that do not necessarily result into a genocide, that do not really disrupt the life in the whole country as the genocide did in 1994. But then I think that it was a question of lack of proper management by the colonialists, by those who took over after independence. I think they found benefit in playing one group of the population against another for their own political benefits. And this became an exercise that continued for quite a long time. For example, in 1959, actually the killings in Rwanda started in 1959 and were repeated in the early 60s, end of 60s, 70s, and even in the 90s, targeting one specific section of the population. So nobody bothered to address this. And then you had refugees staying out of Rwanda for over 30 years, since 1959. The return was in 1990. It was over 30 years. So it was, on one extent, externally introduced these differences that cause such a hatred and then resulted into a genocide. But then it had also people inside the country who unfortunately seemed to embrace these kinds of ideas that divided the people and benefiting a few for political reasons. Otherwise, Rwandese, we cannot talk about races actually within Rwanda, because Rwandese have, if anything, very minor differences, because we speak one language, we have one culture, all of us. The Hutus you hear, the Tutsis you hear, the Twas, they speak one language, they have the same culture, they've shared everything. Rwanda has been a nation state for 500 years. The problems emerged in 1959. So this can easily be resolved with proper management, with that's why we're attempting to have reconciliation. We have had our people debate, discuss what went wrong in their history, what needs to be avoided, and so on and so forth. And as well as creating equitable treatment for all Rwandese, irrespective of whatever is perceived to be their background. We think we can be able to overcome that. I forgot the second question.
A peacemaking force.
A peacemaking force. A peacemaking force, in theory, well, it has been talked about. In practice, it doesn't exist. And I don't see the future of it. Because more and more, people are withdrawing from peacekeeping. Actually, they even, now you can imagine if they are running away from peacekeeping. So peacemaking is even going to be more difficult. So more and more, people are talking about peace, but nobody's willing to pay a price for getting that peace. Yes, that's why in Rwanda, it was very surprising to find forces with tanks, with helicopters, running away from militias with machetes, and so it says all really that proves that maybe, I don't know, but in my country, we wouldn't mind taking part in peacekeeping or peacemaking. We would make that sacrifice, we would pay that price if there was need to do it. But internationally, there seems to be loss of appetite for involvement or for involving troops for peacekeeping, let alone peacemaking. So it's difficult.
My name is Taya Smith. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. President Kagame, you did play a large role of peacemaking during the Burundi peace negotiations. However, since the signing of the Arusha Peace and Reconciliation Agreement for Burundi, its implementation has been limited by a lack of ceasefire. Due to your interest in the Burundi conflict, what are the strategies you advocate for achieving a ceasefire in Burundi? In specific, how can the region create incentives for the warring parties of Burundi, including Jean Bosco's FDD, to join the peace process, and what steps will Rwanda take to continue improving security in the region?
Mm-hmm. Well, the region has been having a framework in which it has been helping to bring about security, peace, and stability in Burundi. It has partially worked in a sense that some parties got together and signed that peace agreement. We tried to urge them to do that and brought them to understand that the only hope for the future of Burundi lies in peace, like for Rwanda, like for any other country. And they didn't sign that peace agreement. However, there are groups that did not come to sign the peace agreement. And some of these are those that are on the ground fighting. Some of them are also based in the Congo. There is need, yes, the regional framework provided for calling upon these rebel groups that were still fighting in Burundi to come to the table, so be part of the peace process, and also be part of the power sharing arrangement that the peace agreement provided as an incentive. It was saying, well, you're fighting for your rights, that's okay, but here is a formula to resolve that problem. And that formula recognizes that you have a stake in rebuilding Burundi. And that's why you should be part of the power sharing arrangement. So that peace process provided for that. So I understand President Kabila died when he was also involved in the peace process in a process of bringing President Buyoya of Burundi together with Jean Bosco, whom we are talking about. But President Mandela has been very active, the former president of South Africa and the region, but in particular, President Mandela has been very active in trying to narrow the gaps between these groups in Burundi, try to bring in the rebel groups to come and be part of the ceasefire arrangement and the peace process ultimately. So we have to keep working together as a region to tell these people in Burundi, irrespective of where they come from, that they matter and should be part of the peace process and should be part of the power sharing arrangement. And then other problems can be resolved in the process. That's the only way forward.
Mr. President, I'm Amir Atter, and I'm a public health researcher at the Center for International Development at the Kennedy School. You've been very eloquent in explaining to us how the large number of deaths in Rwanda has created instability now in poverty and hundreds of thousands of orphans and so on. The question I wish to ask you is whether you contemplate that AIDS may be able to do a similar thing to your country and to the region, and whether on that scale of deaths, it too would affect political stability and not be on its face simply a disease problem. And if so, what would you like the international community to do about that?
Thank you very much. We treat the AIDS pandemic very seriously. As I told you, the statistics say that we have 1 in 10, 1 in 9 infected in our country. This is about 900,000 in our place. This is definitely a very big problem, a crippling problem. It is, we recognize it as a security, as a social, economic problem, a huge problem that we need to handle and try to deal with, given whatever means available. And we've been working, again, both in a regional framework, and we've also been working with the different international institutions that have taken aid seriously and are trying to help countries involved. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, we had some of the drug manufacturing companies coming to Rwanda to study with the Rwandans, the Rwandan government, the departments concerned, how Rwanda can be helped to access drugs, the antiretroviral drugs that can help those infected cheaply. I think this has been, Rwanda is now the 3rd country in Africa to be able to engage these companies in this kind of discussions. One is Senegal, the other is Uganda, and then the 3rd is Rwanda. So we are focusing seriously on these programs of preventive control programs and trying to access all available opportunities to be able to contain that, and we treat that very seriously, and we would appreciate any support by any international organization in this endeavor. Thank you.
The balcony, right side.
Hi, my name is Kisinja Matiabo. I have one question, because you didn't answer well my brother who asked you the presence of your army in Congo, in Kisangani or in Kasai. So
okay, let me quickly answer that, if that is the only one.
Yeah.
Yes. It is purely a tactical issue. Because when the war started, when fighting started, when the rebels started fighting in 1998, when we got involved, what happened when the government got support from the allies, the Zimbabweans, the Angolans, the Namibians, the statement was clear. They made a statement, said, we are taking the war to Rwanda. It is no longer anything else. It's taking the war to Rwanda. And we took that threat seriously. And in actual fact, they started doing that because quickly they moved bases to Kindu. You know Kindu in eastern part of Congo, you must be aware. So they were moving towards Kindu. And the aim again was, as I said, to take the war to Rwanda, cause instability, cause problems. So we said, no, we are not going to allow that. And because the allies of the government had combat aircraft, we didn't, but we had other means to deal with them. And one way to deal with that was to deny them bases near our border. And we made sure that the allies of Kabila did not have aircraft that would fly from Kamina, come and bomb Rwanda and Kigali and go back. So we had to take that whole chunk on foot. The others were using planes, we were using the ground. So, and this has been a discussion even among ourselves, even during the discussion of the peace agreement. When this issue was coming, we said, well, you caused it. When you said they wanted a base in Kindu, to use Kindu, it's a short distance, they would fly, bomb Kigali, go back, refuel, bomb Kigali, go back. We said no. So that's why we quickly took those deep towns to deny them that. So if I may say, purely from that tactical viewpoint, that was the case.
Left balcony.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. My name is Claude. I'm a Mnyamulenge from eastern part of Congo. I thank you for your speech and coming for share with us the issue of peace and development in a country or in a great region. My question, I have two concerns. The two wars, 97 and 98, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, had brought the hatred, insecurity, killing among Congolese themselves. And these allegations, they are all around the Mnyamulenge's name. That we deny because we don't know the original and the end of this war. Now the question is, we are talking about the Lusaka peace, but you never mention anything about the Mnyamulenge in this Accord of Lusaka. However, you mentioned about the security of Rwanda. Have you think about the Banyamulenge community after you leave the country? What will be the future? And my second question is...
No, let's, sorry, just one question because we have people standing still waiting. So the answer of Banyamulenge.
Yes, the answer of Banyamulenge. Well, let me say, first of all, our going into Congo did not cause problems for Banyamulenge. Actually, the problem started before. In 1996, if you remember, the governor of Bukavu had given Banyamulenge a week to leave Congo or they would all be killed. And that was before Rwandese entered Congo.
Right.
So that's a problem. But that's a problem, even though I did not mention it in the Lusaka peace framework. It is actually implied because these rebel groups fighting the Congo, I'm sure among them Banyamulenge, among the leaders there are Banyamulenge, the issue has been to address all the internal problems of the Congo. And they would definitely, they have on their agenda to raise the issue of Banyamulenge, that is the citizenship of some Congolese, whom other Congolese for decades have been saying they should not be allowed to stay in the Congo.
Right.
But you know very well how Banyamulenge became Congolese.
Yes.
They are not just refugees. These are people who, in search of pasture and so on, about, I'm told, 200 years ago, moved into that part of Congo. And when colonialists were drawing the border, they drew a line and said, well, from today, people on the other side are Congolese, people on the other side are Rwandese. So that means for anybody really to come to Congo and say, no, these ones must leave, unless you send them with a piece of land. Otherwise, to just pick people and say, you must leave, but we remain with the land, that is now the center of the conflict. So definitely in the internal dialogue process, that issue must be addressed. The issue to do with the citizenship, to do with the security of Banyamulenge must be addressed by the Congolese. This is the Congolese issue. We can make our own contribution, we can give suggestions, but this is purely an internal issue of the Congolese, which I hope they should be able to resolve eventually.
Student at School of Public Health. My question is going to be short. I just want to know to what extent the women in your country are affected by the HIV/AIDS crisis and what they are doing to deal with it. Thank you.
The women infected by HIV/AIDS? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure of the statistics, but what I can tell you, for example, is that there are many, we have many women infected with HIV/AIDS in different ways. There is one unfortunate way a number of them were infected. During the genocide, actually infecting people with AIDS became a weapon. There were so many women who were infected with HIV/AIDS deliberately by those who are perpetrating genocide. And it has been found that that number, about 60%, you see, they used it by raping them. Mm-hmm. Through rape, they would have people they know who are HIV infected, and then they would gang rape women, specifically targeted women. And it has been discovered that about 60% of those who were raped actually were later on got infected. But this is, I think, even a smaller number of people who were open about it and came forward. There are others who have been afraid of talking about it. So it must be a big number. I'm not sure about the specific figures.
Thank you.
President Kagame, my name is Gautam Pan. I am a junior at Harvard College. My question for you is that several stories about the genocide in Rwanda revolve around the role of the church in their protection and indeed their perpetuation of the genocide. The example of Kibuye, which is the most famous, comes to mind. My question was what the perception of the Rwandese people, especially the Tutsi and the survivors, was towards the church now, and whether the church fitted into your plans of social reconstruction in the society.
Yes, in Rwanda, I think we've been trying everything that can rebuild the society, can bring about reconciliation. I think Ambassador Swanny Hunt mentioned, and I think it had a meaning, a lady who is the deputy of the Minister for Gender and Women Development, having a husband who is in prison, a suspect of the genocide. There are many things like that we do. So for the church, we have tried to separate two things. One, we don't want to blame the whole church. We want maybe to look at individuals who had a hand in doing this or that. Though for argument, somebody can say, no, but this is an institution which really failed to act appropriately, and therefore it should be blamed. But for us, for the sake of moving forward, for the sake of reconciliation, we've chosen to say, no, let's be specific, who in the church was responsible, rather than, so that it gives us room now to engage the church to be positive in playing a role also of reconciling the population of Rwanda. And they have infrastructure, they reach people, they can talk to people. They can, if they are positive, be of good influence in trying to bring back reconciliation. So that's how we handle the church.
We have time for one last question. It'll be the right side of the
Hi, my name is Amy West, and I'm from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. President Kagame, I've seen a few political asylum cases here in the United States of women who are fleeing your country because of crimes committed against them by the RPA. And with the backdrop of the recent talks of rape as a crime against humanity in the international tribunals, how will women now appointed to your...
You're not audible. Take the microphone a little bit closer.
Okay, sorry. I'll start over. I've seen a few political asylum cases here in the United States of Rwandese women fleeing your country because of crimes committed against them by the RPA. And with the backdrop of the recent discussions of rape as a crime against humanity in the international tribunals, I was wondering, how will the women in your ministry positions work with the military to reinstitute faith and cooperation with women in society and the military and police forces in the context of an issue such as rape?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not aware of that information, and I suspect there might be something wrong with that kind of information. I'm not aware of people who are running away, women running away from Rwanda because of cases of rape. I've not heard about that, I'm sorry. And I seem to be very well informed of what is happening in Rwanda. But if there was any case of rape, that's a very serious crime indeed. And we would not hesitate to deal with it in the harshest way allowed by the law. We will not hesitate to do that. So I've not known it as a problem, and I don't think it can be a problem. If we got to know about it, if it ever happened, we would deal with it very decisively. Thank you.
On behalf of the Kennedy School and all of you in the audience, I want to thank President Kagame for the frankness of his answering questions, the generosity of his speech, and to assure him that we all wish him well with the conciliation and peace that he mentioned this evening. So please join me in thanking him again.